Great. Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining tonight. I'm going to talk about the life of Alice Eastwood, which I think many of us may have heard her name and are aware of some of the things about her life, but I'll dive a little deeper. So let's see. Before we get started, I wanted to, oh shoot, sorry. Um, I wanted to talk about the Academy's early history and give an acknowledgement to the lands that we are on. The museum was built and currently stands on the land of the Ramaytush, Ohlone, and Muwekma people. We would be remiss to discuss the history of the Academy without acknowledging the Academy's ongoing impact on the indigenous people that live and continue to live on the land we occupy. We perpetuate colonial practices by merely occupying this land. The California Academy of Sciences was founded in 1853. The founders saw that we have on this coast a virgin soil with new characteristics and attributes, which have not been subjected to a critical scientific examination. Foundations of the Academy was driven by a desire to understand natural history of the region, but also uncovering the availability of economic resources and resources that would support human populations on the land. This idea of virgin soil, which encompasses the pioneering spirit, fails to acknowledge the Ramaytush, Ohlone, and Muwekma people who have lived on these lands. Also, it fails to recognize they have been carefully managing and tending these lands for millennia and were systematically removed by the state and federal government. Our founding is firmly rooted in a settler colonial mindset, um, and the Oxford Language Dictionary defines settler colonialism, a type of colonialism in which the indigenous people of a colonized region are displaced by settlers who permanently form a society there. Thank you. Okay, I'm Rebekah Kim, and I'm the head librarian, as Noreen introduced me, at the California Academy of Sciences. And part of my job is getting to tell the stories of some of the people who worked at the Academy. And so I've been privileged enough to do a little bit of research about Alice Eastwood and be able to tell her story. Before I began this research project, I really just knew the only thing I knew about her was that she had rescued specimens from the Academy's building during the earthquake of 1906. But there's a lot more to her. And so I'm going to go into her life, but it's also she lived a very long and full life. And I only have about 45 minutes. I do not want to keep you here all night. So I'm really just skimming the surface. Alice Eastwood was born January 19th, 1859, in Toronto, Canada, to Colin Skinner Eastwood and Eliza Jane Gowdy Eastwood. Her father was a steward of the Toronto Asylum, and they lived on a cottage on the grounds. Her mother called her a Saturday's child. And even then, as a little thing, she was such a hard worker. She was bright and a quick learner, having learned all her letters. When she was 6, her mother died, and her mother made Alice promise she would take care of her sister Kate, who was 4 at the time, and her brother Sidney, who was just a little over a year. And she did keep that promise all her life. Um, Oops, sorry, I advanced too far. Sorry, there's more to my slide. So in the wake of her mother's death, her father tries to establish himself, and the Eastwood children were cared for by various relatives. Her father reunited them all when she was 8, in 1867, when he ran a grocery store, and Alice, at that young age, had taken on household duties. She was still going to school, and she was an excellent student. Um, this reunion was short-lived. The grocery store was unsuccessful, and Colin Eastwood again had to find different prospects. There was a space for Alice and Kate in a parochial school in an Oshawa convent in Toronto, and her brother Sidney was placed with a childless couple who lived nearby, and they would often bring him to see his sisters. Alice remembers this time with fondness, and she hardly noticed her father had not visited. The school was limited in educational standards, and reading materials were really just materials about the saints. And but this is also where her love for plants and crafting began. The French gardener priest had an orchard and a garden where Alice spent much of her time. The sisters taught them how to sew, knit, and crochet, which was a lifelong endeavor of Alice's. She and Kate were the only boarders, and there were very few luxuries, but she did dote on her sister and used the small amounts of money she earned to buy her treats. Sometimes they spent holidays with an uncle who had similarly aged children, and those were bright times for both of them. Her uncle, also seeing her interest in plants, would sometimes buy her books to foster her interest. In 1873, when Alice was 14, she was reunited with her father and brother who were living in Denver, Colorado. She couldn't stay with them, so she lived with a different family and helped take care of their young children, a 2-year-old and a baby that was a few months old. She ended up taking full-time care of the baby, and very much like Alice, she remembers having a great time. The food was really good, she said, and she could read as much as she wanted. She was always hungry for more literature, which speaks to my librarian heart. The family also gave her a taste of Colorado nature when they summered in the mountains and saw the Colorado wildflowers for the very first time. About a year later, her father bought a house, and then she was able to move in and live with her family. She went back to school while also maintaining the house for her father. When Alice was 16, her father remarried to a Lydia Johnston, who was a teacher. She was able to run the store, which then allowed her father to get her sister Kate, who was still at the convent school, which then finally reunited the entire family. Alice does admit that things were difficult when her father first remarried, but she and her stepmother eventually become close. Her father, as absent as he was and as terrible as he was with money, her stepmother often wrote to her to complain. He saw in her something special, and in 1912 writes to her, I must confess that I think I have undervalued botany, or rather, I have thought that the same industry, brains, and initiative would reach greater results. I have changed my mind. You are the only one of a large family connection who have done anything to make us remembered after we are all dead. In 1879, when she's 20, she graduates as a valedictorian from East High School. During school, she helped her family with the housework, but she also helped with custodial work at the school and even got a job as a seamstress. In school, she had a teacher, Adelaide Overton, who gave her 2 books that kind of really started her botany path, Gray's Manual Botany and The Flora of Colorado. Um, she started to study and try to identify the plants around her. Um, So after she graduated, she was given a job as a teacher at the school she graduated from, East High School. She was a natural teacher, and she tried really hard to keep up with all the subjects and tried to make learning as fun as possible. She said, teaching is helping other people to help themselves. She never stopped teaching, really. In her heart, she was born a teacher. What she didn't love so much was the schedule, and she scrimped and saved her wages so she could spend the summers in the mountains. And while in Denver, she learned to ride horseback, which was very handy when out in the field and collecting. She started off riding side saddle and eventually modified the skirt so she didn't have to. She also would wear a slightly shorter skirt that hit the boots instead of trailing on the floor to make it easier to hike and get around in the field. But this was all considered really scandalous and unladylike at the time. And she was okay with that. She spent summers exploring the Rocky Mountains and identifying and collecting plants. She longed to be able to come in different seasons when certain plants were in bloom, but she was really tied down to a school calendar. She had this amazing ability to make friends wherever she went, and she would become a friendly, familiar face, in these somewhat remote areas. The collection she ended up making went to East Denver High School, which then became the basis of the University of Colorado's herbarium. So she did bring, and I just want to highlight some of the pictures here. The picture on the left is a specimen that she brought from Colorado to the Academy. Most of those were lost in the earthquake and fire, but here is a holotype of a Durango tumble mustard that she collected in 1891. And then the photo on the right is her and a group of people up in Colorado. Um, So in 1887, a highlight of Alice's life was when she was 28. She met Alfred Russel Wallace, who was 60 at the time. He was a renowned naturalist and had an independently conceived theory of evolution through natural selection and had published at the same time as Darwin. She had read his writings and was familiar with his work, so they got off to a great start. He was interested in an expedition to Gray's Peak in July of 1887, and he was told that she was the only person who could take him there. And Alice did. She took Wallace up to the top of Gray's Peak, which was over 14,000 feet, and as usual, they had a great time and even ate decently. So that's a photo of Gray's Peak in 1872, and then the photo of Alfred Russel Wallace in 1895. Um, Alice was always open for adventure. She often took a risk and made a bold choice. She would often think of this poem by James Graham, um, My Dear and Only Love. Um, he either fears his fate too much or his deserts are small. That puts it not unto the touch to win or lose it all. And as fate would have it, she was going to make a shift in her life. She had made a sound real estate investment and was going to see those benefits. She lived really simply and was able to save up her money. She and her father made money off off the Denver real estate boom, which then she then invested into another property that would give her a small income for the rest of her life. Um, this good fortune allowed her to pursue her true passion, which was botany, and she said, I can devote all the rest of my life to my beloved botany. So in the winter of 1890, she takes time off teaching to travel to San Diego and then makes her way up to San Francisco in May 1891. Let's see. She knew of the Brandigees, Catherine and Townsend Sith Brandige, who were famous California botanists. She came specifically to San Francisco to meet them, and they had heard of her as well, and had heard of her friendship with Alfred Russel Wallace and also of her Colorado collection. They instantly hit it off, and the Brandeis even invited her for a hike on Mount Tam that weekend. And a little bit about the Brandeis. Catherine received her MD in 1878, and in 1883 she becomes the first woman curator at the Academy. While she's in medical school, she becomes interested in medicinal plants and then was introduced to the Academy from one of her professors. Townsend was an engineer and a surveyor and was interested in botany and even had described some Colorado plants, which Alice was very aware of. Catherine and Townsend actually meet at the Academy, and it's true love. In 1889, they marry, and on their honeymoon, they traveled 500 miles by foot, collecting and studying flora to take back to the Academy. In 1891, when Alice visits the Academy had just opened up their Market Street location. The Market Street Museum was 6 stories. It included 2 separate buildings. The front building, pictured on the right, was a commercial offices that were leased, and the income from renting those spaces supported the research in the museum. The entrance to the museum, which is pictured on the left, and research spaces were in the rear of the commercial building. And then the middle picture there is sort of the courtyard and the main exhibit gallery. In the museum, there are 6 stories in total, with the lower floors being devoted to exhibits and displays, and the upper floors were curator offices, collection rooms, and the library. There was open courtyard in the center, and all this information will come in very handy when I talk a little bit later in this talk. Um, the Botany Club, which was started by Catherine Brandige and its group that met weekly, they met weekly to learn more about plants. And you can see in this picture that most of the members of the club are women. And it was a class that Alice continued during her time at the Academy. I mean, the club would become a great support in regards to friendship, resources, and even helping in the collections. And so here's a photo of the herbarium, which is actually, I forgot to mention, is on the very top floor of the Academy. There were lots of materials to sort and organize, and even in 1893, the work is never ending. When Catherine met Alice, she started thinking about bringing her on and eventually taking her place. Townsend had come into a little inheritance, and he and Catherine thought about moving away and focusing on their botanical writings. Alice had found her people here at the Academy, and during these early years, her world is centered around the Academy, working on the collection, socializing with other staff and visitors, and relishing in all the good food to be had in the city. She was very much into food. She wrote a lot about it. So this is a photo of some of the early Academy members with Catherine Banerjee standing in the center, and Alice Eastwood is on the left in a polka dotted dress, if you can see her. Um, but also, because of her longevity at the Academy, Alice keeps up with many of the curators who end up leaving and like keeps them connected to the Academy as it sort of evolves over time. Alice was hired permanently in 1892 after she had gone home to summer in Colorado. Catherine had given up part of her salary to hire her as a joint curator of botany. In 1894, Catherine retires, which resulted in Alice Eastwood becoming the sole curator and head of the botany department. Even though Catherine leaves the academy and moves to San Diego, she and Alice keep in touch and stay close over the years. For Alice, I'm sure there wasn't very many people who could understand her passion and position as a woman. And for most of her time in botany and at the academy, Alice would be mostly surrounded by men. Catherine is both a mentor and a confidant for Alice. And Alice is like in these early years, she's still learning and unsure of herself when identifying plants. They spoke the same botany language, knew the same people to gossip about, and were often the only women amongst other scientists. So the photo on the left is Alice in 1900 as a botany curator. And then this is in the middle is a wildflower she had collected from Mount Tam in 1897. And then there's a picture on the right is Alice in 1892 in San Francisco. Alice, so her job was really to build the collections, and Alice loved the outdoors, so it was a perfect fit. And she loved, loved, loved field work. Here she is botanizing in Mesa Verde, Colorado, and also in Salmon Trinity Alps. She was very busy building the collections um, by collecting in the field. She was also very focused on organizing the Academy's collection. Catherine, for all her positive merits, was not very organized. She had lots of piles, and Alice saw a lot of work ahead of her. She also started to worry, Alice started to worry about possible fires and thinking of a system in case of an emergency. So she starts to segregate the type specimens from the main collection, which was not the norm at the time. And to help with this work, she would hire people with her own money, something she had learned from Catherine. And for those non-scientists like me, a type specimen is the specimen on which the description and name of a new species is based on, which makes them extra special. So, if you live in San Francisco, you know about this moment. On April 18th, 1906, at 5:12 a.m., an earthquake of an estimated magnitude of 7.9 hit San Francisco. It's probably the biggest shared moment in San Francisco's collective history, and it transformed the Academy and Alice's life. The earthquake destroyed much of San Francisco, but the ensuing fire would do even more damage. So the photo on the left is the Academy building on Market Street after the earthquake and fire. And you can see it's like parts of the entrance. And the photo on the right is the interior of what would have been the building. And you can see the rubble. So at the time, Alice lived on Bernal, and because it was bedrock, she did not feel the full impact of the earthquake. She says it barely woke her up. And so she might not have realized the severity of it. She ate breakfast, made herself a lunch, and went into the academy prepared to spend the day there. And she might have been the first one at the academy, but she wasn't alone. Others had also come as well. The director, Leverett Loomis, was there, who the curator of herpetology, Dr. Van Denberg, the librarian, Mary Hyde, and some other staff members showed up to help with the collections. And I wanted to just show you some of the photos of like what it looked like after the earthquake. And also the photo on the left really shows the elevation. And so this is the thing about Alice that many of us know, is that she saved specimens from the earthquake and fire. She had to get to the and top floor where the herbarium was, and much of the stairs and railings had collapsed. And so I don't actually know how she got to the top, but she does. And with the help of a friend, Robert Porter, she's able to tie up type specimens into bundles and then lower them onto the ground. In all, she was able to save about 1,497 type specimens, which we still have to this day. And for those who are going on a tour, I'm fairly certain Isaac and Ricardo will show you some of them. Some of the other items that were saved were a few other scientific specimens from other departments, a few books, the Academy membership records and minutes. And with Alice's tenacity and good luck, she finds a wagon for hire and gets the materials to a safer place away from the looming fire. The only personal item Alice saves from the Academy is her Zeiss lens, which we still have to this day. Alice is able to go back home for the evening and she packs up her best dress, typewriter, a few personal belongings, and then stays with friends in Berkeley. She lost all her books, artwork, pictures, and mementos, but the pain she feels the most is the loss of a great reference library at the Academy. One of her letters gets published in Science magazine shortly afterwards, and in that letter she says, "I do not feel the loss to be mine, but it is a real great loss to the scientific world and an irreparable loss to California. My own destroyed work I do not lament, for it was a joy for me while I did it, and I can still have the same joy in starting it again. The kindness of my friends have been great. I feel how very fortunate I am, not at all like an unfortunate who has lost all her personal possessions and home." And help and support poured in for Alice. Friends and colleagues sent clothes, money, even invited her to stay with them. She stays in Berkeley for a little while, and then while she's trying to figure out what she's going to do next, and then she comes back into the city periodically, check on the academy materials and other people that she knows. Um, During this time, her she meets Grove Carl Gilbert, who was a renowned geologist and a longtime widower. He was in the Bay Area as part of the USGS to study the damage to farmland by the hydraulic gold mining practices. And he and Alice were both part of the Sierra Club and had mutual acquaintances, so they did know each other. But after the earthquake, Grove asked Alice to go to Marin on a trip to photograph and study the impacts of the earthquake. And this might have been a moment where their friendship either deepens or a romance starts to develop. It's not clear. She doesn't really talk about it. But you can see these pictures of her on this trip. On the left is Alice at a fault trace 2 miles north of Alima, and then there's a fence that's offset by 8.5 feet. Shortly after that, she travels to Los Angeles to visit friends who had sent her train tickets, and it even takes a trip by horseback from Tahoe to Yosemite. And she really does try to make the best of the situation. So there's Alice in Yosemite, and then this photo on the right is possibly her in Yosemite with Grove Gilbert. Um, The path forward. Sometime in May of 1906, Alice receives a letter from the Academy. It's offering her a salary until June and to sign a paper relinquishing any further claims against the Academy. Because the Academy's income was wiped out, which were the commercial rents from the building, the board decides to let all staff go. Everyone seems to have received the same message. Um, about being paid until June and relinquishing any future claims. I know for Alice, this seemed particularly formal and insensitive for her to receive, especially in the wake of her own personal sacrifices and heroic efforts saving the collection. And just to give you some context, there were just two paid curators at the time, Leverett Loomis, who also served as the director and also was the curator of ornithology, and Alice. All the other curators were unpaid. The only people who remained as paid staff afterwards were Loomis and an administrative assistant. Alice really took this personally. And it was a surprise to see this, that In this note, she mentions relinquishing further claims against her salary, but not her position. And I think she always imagined remaining a curator regardless of the financial situation. And I do think she would have been willing to make financial sacrifices, especially since she had some independent income. And for her, this wasn't just any job. It was who she had become. She had spent endless hours and her own money organizing, collecting, and building a great scientific collection. And then with very little explanation to be let go along with everyone else, I think was very difficult for her to accept. She is offered a position at Berkeley's herbarium, but she doesn't feel that is her home. And for the first time is like unmotivated to continue working. She goes home to Denver for a while to take care of her father while her stepmother is traveling. And I think this is a time where she's really wondering if she can continue as a botanist without being associated with the academy. She just had a high school education, and I'm sure she really wondered what future she could have. But over time, we see her slowly come back. We see that um, and I see in her letters that fire in her. And in 1907, she writes to the Academy. When the Academy writes to her asking for her membership dues, she writes back. She's incensed because her dues have always been waived as a curator, and she responds. She responds in an angry way, but signs the letter. Alice Eastwood, curator of what is left of the herbarium. Um, she really does keep herself busy and gets back into botany with or without the academy. She travels east visiting friends who she has everywhere. And she visits East Coast herbariums and is even hired temporarily as an assistant at the Gray Herbarium at Harvard. But she hasn't totally given up on the academy. In 1909, she sends the president and the board a 3-page type plan about reestablishing the herbarium. She mentioned she's heard they've gotten the insurance settlement, so is like hoping this is an opportunity for her. On her trip east, she visits DC, sees the Smithsonian collection, and she even applies for a federal job, only to find out that she's not actually an American citizen. It's during the days when the requirements for citizenship was a bit murky, and she had always assumed she was a citizen because her father always voted. She does eventually get naturalized, but at that moment, it ends her path to a federal position. And for me, it's wild to think that she might have actually left the academy if it wasn't for this like impediment. In 1910, she travels to England for 10 months, and when she returns to the United States, there's a letter from the Academy offering her a position in botany. The photo on the left is her in 1907. The image in the middle is a message she sends to the Academy about her membership dues. And then the photo on the right is a specimen she saved from the earthquake, a larkspur flower from the south side of Mount Davidson in San Francisco. Um, So she receives this letter and she's, of course, elated, but she wasn't quite over the initial snub and took a little time to actually return. When she returns in May 1912, she gets right to it. She needs to find a temporary space to process collections. Since the new museum hasn't been built yet, she attempts to organize the Galapagos materials that were collected in 1905 and starts to plan field excursions. She also starts right away on adding new collections through donations and exchanges. So botanists, including Alice, often collect multiple specimens and will send off duplicates to other herbariums, creating a goodwill exchange of botanical specimens. With her back in these activities, with her back, these activities could resume again. And with her friendly nature and wide network, I'm sure there are so many people willing to send materials to the Academy to help build their collections. So the photo on the left is the Academy staff in front of the new Academy building, North American Hall, in 1923. And then the photo on the right is Alice at Warner Hot Springs. So Alice loved to collect, and the collections were her true love and lasting legacy at the Academy. So I thought I'd show a few specimens that were added sort of during her back during this time. Um, I am not saying any of the scientific names because I'm terrible at that. So I'm just going to describe or use common names. So on the left is a type of thistle collected by Alice in 1913 from Warner's Hot Springs in San Diego County. It's one of the first field excursions she organized for the Academy. In 1914, she actually goes to Alaska to collect willows and other trees for the Arnold Herbarium at Harvard. So this in the middle is a type of maple she collected. And then on the right is this collection that she collected from Evelina Cannon, who had this collection, and Alice was really excited about because it contained rare San Francisco specimens. So this is the type of thistle that was found on Mount Tam. And so, talking about Mount Tam is a very special place for Alice. It's where she first visited with the Brandiges in 1891. And she would often go back on weekends to go hiking. And apparently, she was a really speedy walker and could walk 4 miles in an hour if she had an incentive. She was even invited to join the men's only cross country club on a hike in the 1890s. And they were so impressed with her good nature, intelligent conversation, and her mountaineering skills, she was offered to join again anytime. And so she was the first woman member of that club. She's also the founding member of the Tamalpais Conservation Club that was formed in 1912, and even met and corresponded with the young Ansel Adams. Um, she purchased a weekend home on Mount Tam and like spent a lot of time there, but it burned down in a wildfire in 1929. So the photo on the left is a group, her with a group from the International Photographic Excursion on Mount Tam. And then on the right is her giving a botanical talk to the Conservation Club in 1918. So, a little bit about Alice's personal life. She's not talk a lot about herself in that way, but Alice was not immune to romance, and apparently she was a catch. She mentions a few people having crushes on her. She was once proposed to by a widower that met her on a collecting trip. He thought she was an ideal wife because she was good with his child, an excellent housekeeper, and a good cook. She found the whole thing a nuisance and ended up having to avoid that area in subsequent trips. Apparently, Willis Jepson, who ended up becoming a professor at UC Berkeley and a professional rival, had a crush on Alice in her early years at the Academy. So this was a time where it's hard enough to be a woman in science. She must have known as a married woman, she could not be married and pursue a professional career of any kind. So even when she went home to Denver to take care of her father, she was so overwhelmed by the responsibilities, she complained of having no time to herself. The closest she ever got to marriage was with Grove Carl Gilbert. Gilbert wrote to his son, and he said he and Alice had a romantic relationship for some time, but he was reluctant to propose because he didn't want to get in the way of her career ambitions and burden her with taking care of him while he was ill. But feeling much healthier and ready to settle down, Gilbert, at age 74, and Eastwood, age 59, proposed on February 15th, 1918. And the thing that Alice writes in her daily diary, she said yes. And if you notice the next entry for February 16th, his son Arch visits Alice, which I don't think is a coincidence. I think the reason for Arch's visit was probably to talk over plans for the marriage. Arch's wife had died, and the plan was for Grove and Alice to raise Arch's son Palmer. Alice, with her experience with children, would be well suited to help raise Palmer, and Grove was excited by the idea of molding a fresh mind, but not the child rearing part, and was finally ready to settle down. Honestly, I was kind of surprised when I read this, just because I thought Alice was so focused on her career that she wouldn't do anything to jeopardize it. But, thinking about it, I think maybe she had a very soft spot for children whose mothers pass away and then get passed around to various relatives, like she and her siblings had experienced in their youth. Tragically, Grove Gilbert dies in May, and it is not to be. But that's not the end of the story. Alice keeps in touch with Grove's son Arch and Grove's grandson, Palmer, throughout their lives. And I wonder if she ever thought about what could have been. Her life would have been really different. But Alice, I think, is not a person to look back. She seems to just look forward and move on. Another man who was hugely influential in her life was John Thomas Howell. In 1931, when Alice was 72, Howell was 28, and he was hired as the curator in botany. He got his BA and MA from Berkeley, and ironically, his advisor was Jepson, the same one that had a crush on Alice. And he ends up retiring in 1968. He worked on native California flora, which was a perfect match for Alice. And he thinks so fondly of her, remembers her as an undergraduate and her answering all his questions about the collections. They build a rapport even at when he's an undergrad. And when he needs a summer job in 1921, she hired him to work for the academy. They both loved nature and the outdoors, and they loved botany and collecting. And they were, in so many ways, a perfect match. Carol Wilson, Alice's biographer, called him her son in service. Temperamentally, he was also a good fit with Alice. He was good-natured and patient. He had to be actually, apparently. He didn't get a promotion for 19 years until Alice retired in 1950. He often talked about how she cared about him, paying for his travels and trips, and even paying for publications with his own money, or with her own money, sorry, um, to further support his career. Jepson was his advisor, but he was a reserved man. And in Alice, Howell saw a more nurturing and friendly figure. When Alice died, he wrote tender obituaries and even helped settle her estate. He truly was her son in service. So that's Howell in 1932 on the Galapagos expedition on the left, and then in the middle is a official portrait of him in 1935, and then he and Alice about to fly to New York, also in 1935. The hay wagon. So Alice starts off on a horse on or like on foot and now horse, but now she's into cars. So with cars, the main mode of transportation, a part of what made their partnership work so well was that John could drive Alice when going out in the field. And they drove all over together. They purchased their first car for field work together, but after that, Alice bought the car herself. She also paid for all expenses for field work or brought others who would pay for it. And so for many, many years, the Academy didn't pay for a botany collecting trip. Alice was frugal in general, but generous when she wanted to be. And she was generous to the Academy, the botany department, and to Howe. Alice wasn't a saint, and their relationships did have a few bumps. At 72, Alice just wasn't as physically capable and independent as she used to be, and would sometimes get frustrated. Also, they had differences in collecting styles. He liked to collect in a smaller area more comprehensively, while Alice liked to collect more broadly over a large area. But for the most part, they got along and were good but odd travel companions. And so Alice has so many interests, and she actually does do a lot of work in Golden Gate Park. When the Academy moved to the park and opened up the public museum, Alice embraced that, and she interacted with the public in a much more broad way. She began to teach, and she wanted to popularize the science of botany and to inspire wonder in the natural world. She didn't care who you were. If you were curious and interested, she would help you. She taught a weekly class for gardeners of Golden Gate Park until the 1940s, helping them familiarize them with the park flora. She was good friends with John McLaren, who was the park superintendent, and suggested labeling plants and trees to help educate people. He consulted her frequently on botanical matters. She was active in so many groups, the San Francisco Garden Club, Sierra Club, San Francisco Botany Club, and various plant societies. The list really goes on. And we have to thank her for the Shakespeare Garden, which is right next to the Academy, where she had this idea to have a garden that had trees and plants mentioned by Shakespeare. The funds were raised by the California Spring Blossom and Wildflower Association, and the garden opened in 1929. So here's a photo of Alice sitting on a stone bench that's still there with her name in the garden. On the right is a historic photo of the garden close to when it opened. So 80, she's still working in her 80s, and though she slowed down with collecting, she's still doing a lot of work. She mostly has other people collecting for her. but she still has a lot of friends to see. She's involved in a lot of professional organizations. She's busy writing, and the collections never stop needing work. At this time, the Academy starts an Alice Eastwood Herbarium Fund to build a new building, and she endures the publicity, hoping it would help the botany department. And so these are some photos of her in the herbarium. Um, and she's still close with her family. Air travel makes it much easier to visit. So their photo on the left is Alice and her siblings, Kate on the left, Sydney, who's in the middle, her brother, and herself, Alice, in 1942. And the photo on the right is a color photo of her in the herbarium from 1948, which is the only color photo I've actually seen of her. 90. Her 90th birthday is a big celebration. She has so many parties, endless awards and medallions. Photos of her 90th party are, sorry, her 90th birthday party was given by the American Fuchsia Society. And so these are some photos from that. And her life at this time, she's still working. Her life is filled with friends. Her social calendar is busy as her work one. And she retires in 1950 at the age of 91. In her retirement, she still comes in 2 days a week. The other things that happen in her honor, there's an Alice Eastwood camp. In 1950, a recreation area on Mount Tam was named Camp Alice Eastwood in her honor. And so on the photo on the left is her at that camp. And then in 1951, she receives a medal for 57 years of service in botany from the Academy. But one of her greatest honors was in 1950. She was appointed honorary president of the Seventh International Botanical Congress, IBC, in Stockholm, Sweden. This is an international meeting of botanists in all scientific fields. She was excited for the flight. She was a huge fan of planes and visiting the city. And she even got to sit in Linnaeus's chair. So that photo of her on the left. And at this point, she also becomes a local celebrity in San Francisco and was a spokesperson for a yellow cab advertisement in 1952. She was well known for taking cabs because she never drove. She says in this ad, "Yellow cabs are my salvation, and I use them to go everywhere." So these are some photos of Alice in her longtime home on Lombard Street. It's super hilly, and she still has a wood burning stove. Her life is still very full, but with more naps. She takes a rest after breakfast. And during her career, she dedicated herself to rebuilding the collections, and her expeditions were numerous, including trips to Alaska, Arizona, Baja California, British Columbia, Utah, and all throughout California. By 1942, the collection numbered over 300,000 plant specimens. That's nearly 3 times the number that were destroyed in 1906. And today, the collection has grown to about 2.3 million. Her career included the publication of over 300 articles, numerous books, authored 395 land plant species names, and has 17 recognized species named for her, as well as 3 genera. She died on October 30th, 1953. And because of the success of the Alice Eastwood Herbarium Fund, the Academy is able to build a botany hall in 1951. It was an exhibit that focused on botanical exhibits. And you can see it used to it had a redwood round, which is the photo on the left. And you could see the J.T. Howell as an older man and Robert Miller, who was the director at the time at the dedication ceremony. Alice lived a full life, and she was the perennial adventurer. She was born a few years after the Civil War, and she had seen the world go from horseback to car to airplanes. She also saw the Academy grow from a backroom research institution to a public natural history museum with ever-expanding scientific collections. She was undaunted by these changes and was always ready for the next adventure. She only had a high school education and often the sole woman, but she disarmed people with her friendliness, curiosity, and passion for science. Her life was filled with friends everywhere. And for her, like poetry meant so much to her. And I'll end my talk with a poem she had in her collection that reflects her life well lived. God of the Open Air by Henry Van Dyke. These are the things I prize and hold of dearest worth. Light of the sapphire skies, peace of the silent hills, shelter of forests, comforts of the grass, shadows of clouds that quickly pass, and after showers, smell of flowers, and best of all, along the way, friendship and mirth. All right. And thank you, everyone, for listening, for letting me share Alice's story. Thank you to the California Native Plant Society, Yerba Buena chapter, for inviting me. And just for me personally, thank you to my friends and family who support me in in this historical journey. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank
I could
That
you.
stop
was
sharing.
That was
really
wonderful.
great story about a fascinating person.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. She was an amazing and inspiring woman.
She was.
Yeah,
I also don't think she didn't have TV and I don't think slept very much until much later in life. So she was very productive. Um,
yeah. Man, that makes me feel lazy.
yeah.
What am I doing?
I can take any questions. I see there's some questions in the chat. Um,
Yeah, one person had asked about how did she get to Marin? Do you know if she took a
I
ferry?
think she took a ferry. I think there was a ferry that she could take because I think there was also a ferry that you could take to the East Bay. So yeah. I mean, it would be a very lengthy trip for her, but she would often, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, and then let me see what else have we got here.
Some questions from the Q&A too.
Um,
Yeah, a
It's
ferry to
got
the old
dark.
grade up Mount Tam. Someone knew exactly. Yes, that's right. She took a train too. You had to take a train. Yep.
um,
Let's see here. It's gotten dark in here, sorry. We forgot to bring any side lights.
um, at what point did she save the manzanitas in Laurel Heights? Do you know about that?
Oh, yes, I don't know actually, specifically. I would have to look that up. I don't remember. I'm not a botanist and I am not, so
Mhm.
my interests have always been a little bit more personal about her history, but I know, I mean, she even wrote about she everywhere in San Francisco she would go, she would like collect something and write about it. So I think there was like ones about there's some like grave site or graveyard that she also like collected plants from. I don't remember. I mean, that would be you can ask maybe Isaac or Ricardo, but I think some of the botanists remember more clearly about the manzanitas and like doing her work here in San Francisco. Yeah.
Nice. Is there
Um,
another one?
Um, Oh, the stone bench. It's in Shakespeare Garden, which is like this weird, it's not weird, but it's tucked away right next to the academy. It's kind of fenced. It's like if you take this side path into next to the academy, you can walk into the Shakespeare Garden.
um,
And so that bench is still there. I like sit there all the time to eat lunch, and I didn't realize that she was the one that sort of started it all.
There was some great horned owls hooting in there when we were there a
Yeah.
couple weeks ago.
They're
Couple
often
years
there.
ago.
Sometimes they come and visit us at the academy on our balcony, but I haven't seen them.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for teaching us more about Alice. That was really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I always love sharing stories about the people at the academy, and Alice is like one of my favorites.
um,
Yeah.
well, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. Now we know so much more, and we're gonna appreciate going to the academy and visiting.
Uh, so,
Yes.
is there a good biography you can recommend?
There is one. If people are interested, you can email me. It's out of print, but I do have a scanned copy of it. It's from the 1950s. It is um it's really light. It's like something Alice got to like heavily have a hand in, so it does not, but it is good. It goes over the broad strokes. It doesn't get very personal and it doesn't really talk about her sort of I don't know, some of her issues with the academy over time, especially about being fired. I don't think they ever talk about that. So,
Yeah. Well, sounds like a good subject for a writer.
yeah, I think so. There's tons and she wrote a lot. She kept all her letters. She was great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And
Yeah.
hope to see you all next month.
Yep.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Okay.